Hi there, and welcome to beautiful Adelaide for a change of plans and an embarrassing showing for Qantas, which left me out nearly $250. Before we get into it though, I'm just curious about your thoughts. If your Uber driver doesn't actually drive, what are we tipping for? Companionship? Anyway, Qantas. You know I love my comparisons, and the best one that I can think of in this case is Qantas is the mob boss of the aviation industry. Everyone knows what they do. Everyone knows they're bad on multiple levels, but they're completely untouchable and protected. And so they continue on the same path day in and out, scoffing at the world, since it's not even possible for them to lose market share. And I'll be the first to admit that I was completely wrong about Qantas in the past. It's not that I didn't believe all of the headlines, but oh my god, all of the headlines. Scandal after scandal after scandal, and they still continued onto record-breaking profits. But anyway, it's not that I didn't believe the headlines, but I don't want to make judgments on things that I haven't experienced. My first ever Qantas experience was 18 months ago. A mostly favorable review from Auckland to Brisbane. Well, I was wrong. Before I tell you exactly why though, if you're new here, I'm Kevin, the Flip-Flop Traveler. If I want you to know one thing, it's that the opinions in my videos are honest and my own. If you'd like to know more about what, how, and why I do what I do, scan the QR code to read more. Have a look around the channel. There are hundreds of flight and hotel reviews to watch. This Darwin-bound scam spree starts now. I'm not going to beat around the bush today. We'll enjoy the sights and sounds of the airports as I explain. Y'all know the Routes and Hubs series that we're in the middle of right now, getting from Brisbane to London via many stops. When I first came up with the concept, I had a self-imposed restriction that no single flight could be more than 1,000 miles. A completely arbitrary number that I chose simply to make sure that I was challenging myself in building this itinerary. And with the exception of getting to Pakistan, I did follow that rule. Knowing how expensive domestic fares in Australia can get, I booked all Aussie legs of the trip 8 months prior to flying. To get from Adelaide to Darwin, I chose an itinerary via Alice Springs to follow my rules. It was a route that was nearly double the price of the non-stop option, but as much as it pained me to pay 780 Australian dollars for an economy flight, I did it. You can see my original ticket here. I also paid extra for exit row seats on each segment. I'd remind you that, my rule or not, passengers are allowed to choose whichever routing they want to. Qantas is the one that sold it. So I can't go back in time and show you how much more this ticket was than the non-stop option when I booked it, but I knew the non-stop was in the $300 range. So I searched for random dates this upcoming November, and sure enough, these numbers look awfully familiar. Skip ahead to the day before the flight, and I got an email saying, due to operational constraints on the aircraft operating this flight, we've made changes to your booking on your flight from Adelaide. Both legs were meant to be on an Embraer 190 on Qantas Link. Since these are two fairly short routes for an E190, I assumed it had been downgraded to a prop plane of some sort. I logged in to manage my booking, and there, in addition to the operational changes from Adelaide, it said my flight from Alice Springs to Darwin was also cancelled. If you saw my last Qantas video, you know that I was generous enough to offer up a few new slogans that Qantas might want to use if they're gonna lean into their good old reputation. These were all things that I actually wrote down while in the air with them. I'll show you a few throughout the video. It had already proactively rebooked me via Melbourne for some reason, but I opted for the non-stop instead, since, you know, the flight was cancelled. Nothing I could do. When I got to the airport, I asked a check-in agent how I would go about getting a refund for my exit row seats since I no longer had them. Two of them, in near unison, told me to immediately call the contact center and choose the option for having a flight within 4 hours. I think 4 hours. They noted that otherwise, if I had called after that flight, I might have to wait on hold for hours. So I spent most of my time at the airport on the phone with them. After nearly an hour, they told me to submit a form online, which I did. Long story short, I never got a refund from them. In my mind at this point was also the money that I quote-unquote lost by buying the more expensive itinerary. But at that point, it was in the what you gonna do category. Fast forward to later that day. I had just checked into my hotel in Darwin when I got a notification from Flighty, which still had my original itinerary loaded into it. 4:29 p.m., the flight to Alice Springs left the gate, and guess what? It was an E190. Fast forward to that evening, and I got a notification when my canceled flight from Alice Springs took off. I literally watched the thing land in Darwin since I was at an airport hotel. I was seething. Unbeknownst to me until that moment, I had been involuntarily bumped from 2 flights, which in most countries would lead to compensation. But if the airline lies to you and tells you one flight had an aircraft change and the other was canceled, and then you say, okay, I agree to the changes, well, they look like the heroes getting you on another flight. The thing I was most pissed about, though, was the fact that I knew I couldn't prove the price difference when I booked the flights. A couple weeks later, I did call Qantas to check on the status of the exit row refund, and just for the hell of it, inquire about the fare difference. After an 80-minute hold, I was told the exit row refund was, quote, processing. Hi there, future Kevin here. So I'm not home with my editing equipment at the moment, so I couldn't re-edit this entire video. So I'm just splicing in an update. On August 25th, I received an email from Qantas, which referenced a mysterious confirmation number and said my refund was being processed. That reference number was not one that I'd ever actually used, so I called their contact center to see what was actually being refunded, since it didn't mention anything in the email, and when I tried to check online, it said my flight had been cancelled. Keep in mind, I received this email 2 days after my last Qantas video posted, so I assumed it had something to do with that downgrade. After 55 glorious minutes on hold, I was through and was told that the email was referencing the exit row seat fees, which I'd requested a refund for many months prior. They said I'd be receiving a refund within 7 days, and that was indeed the case, so please keep this in mind when watching the video. I always want to be as fair as possible, so I suppose the specific things I mention about not refunding my seat fees has been resolved. But there's still plenty more to this story. Not to mention, it shouldn't take 5 months to refund a seat fee. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming. I lied. Hi there, this is now future Kevin here with a further update related to both this and my previous Qantas video. On September 4th, I received an unexpected call from Qantas's head of customer advocacy. It turns out, those exit row refunds were in fact a result of the previous video and a behind-the-scenes investigation into the mishaps of my experience. I won't drag this out too long, but let me just say very briefly, we had a nice 16-minute chat. I mentioned how this entire trip was inspired by Qantas to begin with. Qantas seemed genuinely apologetic, and rather than making excuses, simply pointed to the work they need to continue to focus on to ensure that these things don't continue to happen. They also mentioned that they'd been working behind the scenes with British Airways to get my points partially refunded from the last flight, acknowledging that BA in fact didn't get notification of the downgrade. Speaking of this current video's flight, I talked about my frustration with the confusing lack of transparency in first getting an operational change email, followed by a flight cancellation notification online, when in fact neither were really true. Qantas pointed out that there was an aircraft change, but it was from one E190 to another E190, and they're still investigating how that like-for-like change could have resulted in the snowball effect that happened with my ticket. To be fully transparent, I was not offered anything, and Qantas was aware this video would be coming out as originally planned today. Them even pointing to the fact that what happened. I do give them credit for reaching out. I believe this is just the 4th time any hotel or airline has reached out following a video, so that is something. Whether or not meaningful changes are actually made in the future though, we shall see. Okay, now really back to the video. And the other refund was not possible since I bought transport from one point to another, not actual flights. At least their messaging is consistent. Thing is, at the end of 2022, there was a major scandal with Qantas where they were found to be selling flights to actual people that they never ever intended to fly. Qantas's original response? That customers don't buy specific seats on specific flights. Rather, they buy a quote-unquote bundle of rights and a promise that the airline will do its best to get the consumers where they want to be on time. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission said Qantas's actions were, quote, egregious and unacceptable, unquote, after Qantas outright admitted to purposely misleading customers. They were fined $66 million and forced to pay $13 million in compensation to more than 86,000 passengers who were part of the ghost flight scandal. So to me, it quite simply sounds like Qantas is still using the same tactics and simply changing the name of the game. The Australian Council of Trade Unions even went as far as to say in their report on price gouging that Qantas's airfare increases in 2022 may have caused nearly 25% of the country's overall inflation in 1 month. So we're gonna board soon, and I'll wrap up this part of the video with, I did call my credit card company about the fare difference, and they confirmed what I imagined to be true, that it wouldn't be worth submitting a dispute since I had no proof. So, since this is the last Qantas video that I'll have for quite some time, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the one exciting plan that is on their radar: Project Sunrise. Project Sunrise was actually part of the inspiration behind making this trip, imagining that in the future, I could fly non-stop from Sydney to London just to feel the contrast to this insane journey. You may remember this graphic from a Singapore Airlines video I put out last year, the longest flights in the world. The only one I needed to add was Qantas's Perth to Paris route. Project Sunrise will put them all in the rearview mirror. Qantas has been planning for years now, starting with a call to Airbus and Boeing to design a plane that could fly non-stop from Sydney to both London and New York. Airbus answered that call, and there are specifically designed A350-1000s on the way in a few years to make all of this a possibility. Right now, these are Qantas's long-haul flights. With the dawn of Project Sunrise, no pun intended, they will start from Sydney and then add Melbourne to the list of non-stop destinations to both London and New York. Other destinations are speculative at this point, but I've heard Chicago, Rio, Paris, Frankfurt, and Rome being considered as well from the two Qantas hubs. The aircraft interiors also represent a massive upgrade to their current offerings, with a 4-class configuration that will actually give the aircraft one less seat than Japan Airlines A350-1000s, just to prove a point, I suppose. I'm really excited to see which of these routes start, but my god, I am terrified to see the fares they're going to charge. Okay, I know it's been rough so far, so let's get on this 16-year-old E190 to Darwin. As we head down the jet bridge, I'll put up the flight stats. If you'd like to follow along on my routes and hubs journey from Brisbane to London but aren't free at the times that I post, bookmark the playlist linked above and in the description so that you're able to follow along whenever it's the best time for you. I love Embraer E190s. I think 99.997% of travelers would agree they're generally the most comfortable regional jets on the market. Qantas didn't quite get the memo though. Legroom is pretty tight, and the seat backs and seat services are just so short. At least though, there's a headrest that can be moved up and down with nice big Embraer windows, along with the overhead air vents. It was on autoplay. I was multitasking. I was feeding my Tasmanian devil. These are all real reasons, kinda, why I often forget to click the like button on videos that I actually did like. So anytime a video creator asks me to like a video or subscribe, I do it in that moment if I like the video, because otherwise I'm gonna forget, I promise you that. So if you enjoyed this video today, be sure to click all the buttons, but please only the good ones. My Patreon is also linked in the description below. Thanks very much in advance. We pushed back in tandem with the company 737, and the safety briefing began as we had our short taxi to the runway. It was a gorgeous day for flying. If you've never been to Adelaide, make sure to stick around for the takeoff views of the downtown area. Totally surrounded by parks, one of the most inventive city designs that I've ever seen myself. The spool up, takeoff, and airport stats are coming up next. That is quite a beautiful wingtip. I love flying over large countries with varied landscapes. Just flying due north today for a few hours, and we're passing wine country, nearly unlivable deserts, lush tropics, and much more. Since this was the regional arm of Qantas, I didn't really know what to expect in terms of service. While the crew was, let's say, less than enthusiastic, the food was actually better than I expected. This was a lunchtime flight, and on offer we had a pesto pasta salad with sliced chicken breast and mozzarella. It was served chilled, and I really couldn't fault the flavor. A choice of drinks, including beer and wine, was served along with it. And I went with a white wine to enjoy with the views. As for entertainment on board, there are certainly no in-flight monitors, but there is Wi-Fi with a full system available to stream. I would also like to apologize for never screen capturing this horizontally before. I don't know why it never occurred to me to do it this way. There is a pretty extensive mix of movies and TV shows on offer, as well as a nice moving map. Restrooms on board were kept mostly tidy throughout the flight. To my surprise, around an hour before landing, the crew passed around with cheese and cracker boxes. A nice touch, but cheese and rice crackers belong together about as much as grapes and Vegemite. Things started to green up as we began our descent into the very north of this beautiful country. Then, to my further surprise, the crew came around with Kit Kats. Gotta admit, it's kinda hard to deplane a flight and be mad at it after you have a Kit Kat. Perhaps this is Qantas' way of asking for the world to give them a break? I feel like I keep getting little small baby slaps from Qantas, while many other customers in Australia are completely shafted day in and out. But now that I see the games they play, in the future I will be avoiding them at all costs. There are few developed countries on Earth that have aviation policies that are so protectionist that the consumer is left hanging like a piñata ready to be beaten by Qantas. All in exchange for propping up the national airline. The beautiful landing and airport stats are coming up. And that is that. I don't want to draw this out anymore, and lucky for you, I don't have any more footage to do so with. In conclusion, Qantas has questionable business practices at best, and are purposely trying to scam their customers at worst. They're not the only bad guy in the aviation world, but sometimes it really does seem like they're competing to be the worst. Laughing the entire way home, with record-breaking profits, with 10% less passengers, and 18% less staff than before COVID. Something's gotta give, Qantas. So, lucky for us all, this is the last negative review for quite a while, until November 2nd to be exact. So, it's going to be a smooth, wonderful sailing for the next 16 or 17 videos or so. That said, I hope you did enjoy this one. If you did, please be sure to click the like button and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss out my twice weekly videos. I'll see you next time at the Intercontinental Sanur in Bali. And if you're looking forward to that one, watch the Intercontinental Jimber on Bali video on the channel beforehand. It will give you a hell of a lot of context. Thanks as always for watching until the end.